Welcome back to the Amelie Moran podcast. Today we are talking about our last place in Central America, which feels absolutely crazy. We are going to be talking about Panama today, specifically Panama City. This place was a mix of chaos, skyscrapers, large shopping centers, cobbled streets, and of course, the Great Panama Canal. Also, if you've ever booked a sketchy hostel to save money, or ever wondered what the big hype is about the Panama Canal, I think you'll get this episode. So let's get into it. Let's dive into the dodgiest accommodation I think we stayed in on our entire trip. It was probably the most unsafe I have ever felt. Panama was a very, very last minute decision in Costa Rica. It was not on our agenda originally, but whilst we were in Costa Rica, we kind of realized that the next place we were going to go to would be Colombia, and we'd be flying over Panama, and it kind of just made sense to go and see the canal. I mean, Sam really wanted to go and see it, but we realized it was very, very expensive. I think it's almost like the US dollar. So we didn't really want to stay for too long. So what we decided to do was book a flight from Costa Rica to Panama City, stay there for 2 nights, 1 full day, and then go to Colombia. So we actually only spent probably less than 48 hours in Panama. But because it was all last minute, we obviously booked ourselves the most dodgy hostel in the most dangerous part of the city. Of course, during the booking process, we did not know this, otherwise we would not have chosen it. Now, this entire story starts at the airport. This is where it all just starts going a bit pear-shaped. And let me remind you, we were only here for less than 48 hours. So already when we've landed, things start getting a bit strange. As we were collecting our check bags, so many sniffer dogs emerged or kind of came out of hiding, it seemed. And all of these army or security guards had massive, massive guns, and they were just patrolling around the airport. And this airport is absolutely tiny. Think of a classroom. That is how big the check bag area is. And we're all standing there from our flight trying to get our bags. And there's all these dogs passing through us. We have all these guards pointing their guns everywhere. It was absolutely terrifying. And I have been in airports where they have guns. I have seen security guards and policemen and all of that carrying guns. But that was not even the frightening part. For me, it was the sniffer dogs and how aggressive they were. Also, in Latin America, when you're crossing borders, they have really strange laws about what you can and can't bring into each country. Some countries you can't bring fresh fruit and veg across the border. Some you can't bring certain soil on your shoes. It's very, very pedantic and it's very, very confusing at times. So suddenly I'm thinking, fuck, what have I got in my bag that I'm not allowed? I don't really want to get arrested. I don't want to get in trouble. It doesn't really look like the nicest place to get in trouble. But I got my bag and we were all good and we got out of the airport and we now had to wait for a taxi. This taxi process was insane. There were barely any taxis, any Ubers, anything that were coming to the airport. Nobody could get a cab, nothing. And everybody was quite stressed out waiting at the airport because we did land in the evening. It's starting to get dark. You don't really want to be walking around. You are in the middle of absolute nowhere. We were so desperate to get a taxi that we were bribing cab drivers. We didn't really have any cash on us, so we were really trying to bribe with what we had. Eventually, a guy says that we can get in the cab. And so we put our bags in the cab and we're like, okay, let's go. And suddenly, this random guy gets into our cab and sits in the front seat. And I'm thinking, this feels dodgy as fuck. I don't like this. What the hell is going on? And he doesn't say anything. He doesn't turn around and say hola. He doesn't say hi. He doesn't say anything. He just gets in, faces forward, and just stays silent. And we're like, what? Who are you? What is going on? But we can't really say anything because we need the cab driver to take us away. So it was a very awkward, felt very unsafe situation. But we are sitting in this cab, and then halfway through the journey, this guy gets out of the car. He actually ended up being okay. We realized that he could speak a tiny bit of English, so we ended up sort of having a chat with him, but it's just a bit awkward. You just don't know this person and they're just in your cab, and yeah, it was very odd. We then carried on to our hostel, and the only way I can describe how bad or dangerous or unsafe the neighborhood was that we were staying in, it can only be described in the way that our cab driver pulled up to our hostel and said, "Don't get out yet." I'm thinking, are we getting kidnapped? Like, what is going on? This has been such a strange experience, and we've only been in this country for like 2 hours. What is going on? And he says, "Don't get out. This is a very, very dodgy part of Panama City. This is not safe for tourists at all. When you get out of the car, get your bags quickly. Go straight into your hostel. Don't speak to anyone. Don't come out of your hostel at night. Don't even walk around in the day. And if you're ever leaving your hostel, make sure you have a cab booked." What the fuck? Then as we're doing what we're told, we get out of the car, we're getting our bags, we're trying to move quickly. He taps on the window from inside the car. He passes us a handwritten note of his name and his phone number and says, "If you get into any trouble, give me a call." I am genuinely terrified at this point. I'm thinking, can we go back to the airport? Like, I don't want to be here. This was so terrifying. And the thing is as well, I might sound like I'm being dramatic, but you could see it in the streets. We were in a very, very poor area. There were a lot of people on things around us, a lot of quite drunk people too. And it didn't feel safe at all. Whether you're a foreigner or not, or a tourist or not, or whatever, I don't think it would have felt safe either way. Also, we weren't close to any restaurants, corner shops, like anything. We were literally in the middle of what felt like nowhere. We'd been told not to walk around our neighborhood at any time, so we didn't really explore around where we were. I think we were quite grateful that we'd only booked 2 nights to stay there. And look, at the end, it actually just wasn't that bad. It was fine. When we got into our hostel, the people running the hostel were so, so lovely. Our room didn't have any windows, which I did think was a bit strange. I think it just sort of added to the creepy vibe, but it was fine. We were completely looked after. It was all good. And we actually ended up meeting this woman who was from New York, and she was visiting, and she gave us a really good tip, which was, because we obviously couldn't go out and get any food, we weren't around any restaurants, nothing. She gave us the app that Latin Americans use for kind of like a Deliveroo, Uber Eats type of thing. If you want it whilst you're out there, it's called Pedidos Ya. It's so good. It's literally Deliveroo, but just the Latin American version. And we ended up just staying in our room the night we arrived and just tried to relax because we were quite stressed, quite worried. I think also when you're in an area like that, you can't tell if even your accommodation is safe. Even though all the people were so lovely and they didn't give us any reason to be worried, you do just kind of second guess things, and like, you don't know if someone could come in the night, and you don't know if someone is gonna come into the hostel during the night and maybe cause some like chaos. Like, you just didn't know. I really can't fault them for it, to be honest. It was a fine room. Like, it had a bed and a bathroom. That's kind of all we needed for our stay. And yeah, I wouldn't recommend staying there in that neighborhood, but kudos to the people running the hostel. They were really lovely. Now, the next morning, this is our full day in Panama. This is the only full day we have in this country, in this city. We decided to go to the old town part of the city because apparently it was beautiful. We'd heard really good things. And I think if we were to go back, I think this is where we would stay. We realized that a lot of backpackers actually stay in the old town. But for some reason, I think at the time we thought it was just going to be quite expensive, but this is really where it's at. Like, this is where you should be if you're going to Panama City. It's so stunning. The architecture there is absolutely beautiful. We obviously got a cab to the old part of Panama City, but when we arrived, the first thing we saw was this Coca-Cola cafe, which we thought was the coolest thing. We found out that it was one of the oldest cafes in Panama. I think it opened like early 1900s. And it was the first cafe in Panama to serve Coca-Cola. And I think it's not directly like partnered with Coca-Cola. I think it was just this big phenomenon. I'm not quite sure. But it was so cool. I mean, it was quite weird because it is just sort of like American diner style, I would say. Very, very simple. Like a lot of Coca-Cola branding everywhere, but I wouldn't say it's like anything too special. And we also found out that the entire cast of Prison Break, quite a few famous people had eaten at this cafe, but we found out that the entire cast of Prison Break ate there when they were filming in Panama for one of the seasons. And I absolutely love that show. I absolutely binge watched the first few seasons. I feel like the last few seasons was a bit different, but the first few seasons of that show, I was so excited by the fact that they'd eaten at this cafe. I thought it was so cool. We then just had a wander through the town, if I'm honest. We just went all down like the cobbled streets, checking out all of the gorgeous, colourful architecture. There is this cool tour that you can do, and I think you can get a tour guide, or we just did it by ourselves, where in the centre square, there is a map of all these different landmarks and monuments and things you can go and see and learn a bit of like the history and culture of Panama. So we kind of just did that walk around town, and I can't say how long it took us. It can't have taken us that long, but it was really enjoyable. I mean, you just sort of educated yourself. They had like little plaques to explain what everything was. So I personally wouldn't go with a tour guide if you're going to do this. It is also quite hot in Panama. Well, it was when we were there. So the thought of going around with a tour guide in 30-degree heat was like last thing I wanted to do. So I feel like it's definitely worth doing on your own. It also means you can take everything in at your own pace and you can walk at your own pace. So we really enjoyed doing that. It's definitely a really good way to see the old town of Panama City. But one of our favorite things was honestly just to sit and have a beer in like a local bar, and we were just kind of people watching and just kind of absorbing everything around us. I think it felt very, very strange to only be somewhere for such a short amount of time. We also got chatting to our waiter because he ended up living in London at some point in his life, so he was really trying to practice his English, and it just felt a bit more like you were submerged in a bit more culture rather than obviously where we were staying. We couldn't even walk around during the day. So it was really nice to be able to feel like you were actually getting a bit of culture and getting involved with the local people. And actually now I remember one part of the sort of tour that we did around the old town, you ended up on this pier where you could see the entire city, skyscrapers and everything all along the ocean. And I remember that being really, really beautiful. And speaking of the ocean, that brings us to the Panama Canal. I hope you can appreciate my little transition. Anyway, Panama Canal, what is the hype? I was asking myself the exact same thing. I really was not expecting anything too special. I've seen canals before. I understand how they work. So I was a bit like, what is the big deal? But oh my God, it is absolutely worth the hype. I think it's one of the best things to go and see in Central America. You're watching these massive container ships pass through, and just there's so much operation to them passing through. It's not simple at all. You have these little cars that are on the ledges of the canal, and they're controlling the stability of the ship. I know I sound really nerdy, but seeing it in person happening in front of you is absolutely mental. And I think also whilst you're there, you learn how much the tolls are for things like passing through, and how big the boat is depends on how much you pay as a toll, and all of these different things. And like, it was something like the Panama Canal makes almost $5 billion per year just in revenue, which is so mental to me. And then I think one of the tolls to pass through, it can be up to $300,000 every time you pass. That is like unthinkable money. Like that's just to pass a ship. Wow. Like it's absolutely mental. And I didn't realize that it was going to be this vast of a scale. I just didn't have any concept of that before, but I'm so glad that we went. You also can go, it's definitely worth it, but you can go to the IMAX cinema, which they have at the Panama Canal, and they play you this film. I think it cost us about $17 each to go and watch it. And they play you this film and they explain all of the Panama Canal's kind of foundations, why it was being made, how they did it, the problems that it caused, the problems that it solved. Like, it was just absolutely amazing. It's also narrated by Morgan Freeman. So absolute bonus. You know it's going to be good. Coming from somebody who just was not expecting to be that sort of impressed by the canal, I was so grateful that we went. I was really happy. Now it's time for the Amelie Moran ranking system. So let's do it. Food and drink, I said 4 out of 10. Now, I said 4 out of 10 because we did not eat healthily in Panama. I have to say, it was not the best place. We went to the biggest shopping center in Central America. It's in Panama City. I really wanted to go, not to even buy anything, but just to say that we'd been. I thought, how big could it actually be? It's massive. Anyway, we went to the food court there. Absolutely nothing healthy. Even the supermarkets, it felt like nothing was healthy. It was all massive fast food brands and just greasy, like just not nice. And I know that that's not going to be traditional Panama food. I'm just saying from our experience, yeah, I can't say that the food was the best. I just think I felt unwell most of it because it kind of felt like eating McDonald's for every meal, which when you've been eating very clean in Costa Rica, definitely upsets your stomach. Nightlife, we said 3 out of 10, but I can kind of only go off our experience. So I think in the old town, the nightlife would be so much better. I'm sure that's also where a lot more hostels are, a lot more backpackers, because it is nicer. I'm just saying 3 out of 10 for where we were. I mean, I probably should say like 2 out of 10. We couldn't even leave our hostel at night. So yeah, it wasn't great where we were. History and culture, I've said 10 out of 10, obvious reasons. The gorgeous old town and then the Panama Canal in itself is such a monument, and I'm so happy we went to see it. Accessibility and English level, I've said 6 out of 10 because in terms of accessibility, we obviously were quite limited with where we stayed, but I would just say in general, the kind of cabs and taxis are not widely available. And then English level, I would say it's okay. Panama is quite American, I would say, but we didn't really encounter a lot of people that spoke English. Safety, 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10. If I was going to rank it based on where we stayed, I obviously would put probably 0, not safe at all, do not go, avoid. But if you are going to do Panama properly and not do it the way that we did it, and you're going to stay in the old town, I can imagine that it would be a lot safer because it's quite touristy, there's loads of people around, a lot more backpackers, a lot more people that you can surround yourself with. So I've said 8 out of 10, but I've not really based that on our experience. And then expenses, I've said 4 out of 10. I would say Panama is quite expensive. Very happy we only went for like a day. Food is very expensive. I would say it feels very much like you're in America. I would say it's kind of like US and UK prices. So overall, I am giving Panama 6 out of 10, which makes me kind of sad because I feel like the Panama Canal does speak for itself, and I feel like it's so beautiful and so cool to see in person. So that part I want to give a 10 out of 10. But yeah, I just think if we'd not seen the Panama Canal, I probably wouldn't go back to Panama City. I probably wouldn't recommend it, but I 100% recommend going, even if it's just to see the canal. Even if it's just to see the canal and the old town, I think it's so beautiful. And to wrap this up, Panama City is absolutely chaotic. It's also very charming and full of surprises. If you ever have the chance to go, it's incredible. But that is it from me. I have a very exciting episode coming out next week, which I can't wait for you all to see. So make sure to subscribe and like this episode, and I will see you next week. Bye.